What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 6 of House of the Dragon, an episode called The Princess and the Queen, which was directed by Miguel Sapochnik, who sadly is leaving the show after this season. And the episode was written by Sarah Hess. And speaking of writing, I just want to say from the outset, I remain in awe of how great a job this show has done at adapting this fucker right here. There's so many shows and movies that find an intellectual property or a book or whatever and basically say, oh, that's nice, and throw it over their shoulder and then do whatever they feel like doing. This show keeps managing to squeeze in so many cool little details. And if you're a fan of that book and you're thinking about a possible show or movie, there are a lot of details where you might think to yourself, all right, well, I can let these slide. As long as they get like these key details, then I'll be happy. But this show goes above and beyond again and again. Little details, little throwaway lines. It's a model of great adaptation as far as I'm concerned. And they just pack so much plot and so much story into each episode. And here we are with an episode that featured a 10-year time jump from the previous episode, 2 of the stars being replaced by different actresses, and yet the show just flows on by. It's a whole new era in the story. It's a new era for the show in terms of cast and crew. And I think it all just continues to unfold beautifully. And in 4 weeks' time, we are all going to miss this show desperately. Because as far as I'm concerned, we've had 6 episodes where they're either solid or really good. Like, there hasn't been a crap episode yet. There hasn't even really been a crap scene. Now, compare that to the show's distinguished competition over at Amazon. And anyway, I feel like anybody who wants to make a case against the rival show, this show does a very good job of just speaking for itself, and I remain just a very happy, vocal, enthusiastic fan. And I'd love to hear how other people are feeling about this, but as far as the new actresses playing Rhaenyra and Allison are concerned, it took me maybe 5 seconds to get over the hump where I was not distracted remotely, because this show, it's so immersive and it just feels so true to itself and it feels so authentic. Every little detail, every little performance, every line of dialogue, it all reinforces a greater whole. As the old expression goes, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And I just love this episode because it just continues to stir the pot, one great juicy detail after another. And obviously the main issue at hand is that Princess Rhaenyra now has 3 children. One's a baby. She's got 2 boys. It's Jacaerys, Lucerys, and now Joffrey, named after the Knight of Kisses, who we saw meet his demise in the previous episode. And none of them happen to look that much like Laenor. And Laenor's been doing his duty and, hitting his mark, so to speak. But everybody's got eyes, and we have this brilliant opening scene where during the birth of her latest child, Alicent tells the midwives that she wants to see the baby immediately. And so Rhaenyra, bleeding and just falling to pieces, has to lug the child across King's Landing or the Red Keep to see Alicent. And of course, Alicent acts like, oh my God, like, you shouldn't be on your feet, blah, blah, blah. Acting so concerned and so respectful, when obviously these 2 ladies are just going to war. The knives might not be out yet, but they are basically doing everything in their power to outmaneuver one another, work to each other's mutual disadvantage. And it's just fascinating watching them just compete for territory, for ground, for advantageous footing. Oh, and speaking of the birth, one little detail, maybe this is just because I've never had children myself. I've never been in a hospital when a baby's born. That little detail, the cutting of the umbilical cord, I was like, oh, Jesus. And in a show with so many gross details, you would think that wouldn't be anything. I'm sure a lot of girls out there are like, oh my God, like, grow up, who cares? But at any rate, I thought the cutting of the umbilical cord was particularly intense. So ordinarily, I might say that this show gave us a new status quo for the second half of the season, but that's not true, because the status quo is disrupted yet again by the end of the episode. And that's always the sign of a franchise that has a lot of confidence, because we see so many franchises that are just like locked in amber where nothing ever changes because they're worried that whatever magic formula made it popular in the past might go away. But the characters that are in play and are more or less in power at the beginning of this episode, a lot of them don't make it to the end. I mean, perfect example, the Hand of the King, Lionel Strong, his son, Sir Harwin, a.k.a. Breakbones, or Damon's wife, Lena. They're all going strong at the beginning. They're all in positions of enviable power, and none of them makes it to the end of the episode. And once again, this all comes from the source material. They are truly following that book like a goddamn roadmap, which just makes me drool with pleasure because it's just, we so rarely see that happen. Even little lines like when Alicent just throws a huge dagger at Laenor verbally when she says, "Do keep trying. Sooner or later, you'll get one who looks like you." I mean, that's a line directly from the book. And it's so biting and it's so sarcastic, but obviously it has the veneer or the facade of being polite and so on and so forth. And they're all pretending to be polite in spite of the fact that as Rhaenyra leaves the kind of forced meeting with her father and former friend / mother-in-law, we see a trail of blood following Rhaenyra as she leaves the room. And once again, just this show never spares us any of these dark details. But I mentioned before Breakbones, aka Sir Harwin Strong. We see that he is now the commander of the City Watch and that he's keeping a close eye on his boys. And while he and Rhaenyra believe like their secret is more or less well kept, once again, everybody's got eyes. The only person who appears unwilling or unable to see the obvious parentage of the three boys is Viserys. And Viserys, he's got the blind love and affection and loyalty to his daughter. And he regards anybody suggesting that anyone other than Laenor being the father of the kids as basically words of complete and total treason. Alicent's point of view is that it's an insult to the throne, and it's an insult to House Targaryen, it's an insult to House Velaryon. And she basically spends the rest of the episode plotting and scheming against Rhaenyra. And as is the case with all great conflicts, you can definitely see the point of view of both sides, which is what's going to make this fucking conflict all the more juicy and interesting as the show proceeds. Now, in spite of all the characters who died this episode, there are also a lot of new characters who were introduced. We've got Alicent's kids with Viserys. We see their eldest son, Aegon, who is a spoiled brat who enjoys standing in his window and jacking off in the city. We meet his younger brother, Aemond, who's being mocked by both his older brother as well as his cousins for not yet being a dragon rider. They even mock him at one point by introducing him to this giant pig. And we also meet Alicent's daughter, Helena. And there's a great little detail with Helena. It was almost a throwaway line for people who have not yet read the book. But as people are aware, a lot of Targaryens have the ability to kind of like dream of the future or see into the future. But when they're discussing the bullying of Aemond for not yet being a dragon rider, we get this really ominous prediction by the sister where she just says, he'll have to close an eye. I'll say no more on that front, but it's in the episode and it's worth mentioning. But the show offers some really interesting details that are not in the book. I love the way they fleshed out the tactics and the training that are employed in the Dragon Pit, which we never really learned that much about while reading Fire and Blood. But we see these really scarred dragon trainers trying to teach the future rider of Vermax how to give it orders so that it'll learn to accept orders from its rider alone. They feed it a goat. And at the end of the scene, after Aemon's been embarrassed, we get this really great ominous camera move as it floats down deeper into the dragon pit, and he goes down there exploring, and we see there's a big-ass dragon down there, but once again, I just love anything and everything related to all the, all the textures and details that are related to becoming a dragon rider that oftentimes get overlooked or left out of the actual text. And along the same lines, we get one of the most gorgeous shots of the show so far when we see Damon riding the bloodworm over the water and we see it dragging its tail behind it, leaving a little wake. It was just so damn sweeping and epic. But as he climbs up into the sky and he looks up, we see that he's being overshadowed by the biggest fucking dragon there is in the context of this fictional setting right now. I mean, in the past, it was Balerion the Black Dread who was the biggest, but now Veigar is the largest dragon out there. And we see that Veigar is being ridden or flown by Lena. Lena loves to fly. So while the Bloodworm might be a little quicker and more maneuverable, Veigar is just big as shit. And just the way he was introduced, it just gave us such a sense of scale. And toward the end of the episode, we were reminded again just how big Veigar is with those lingering close-ups on his head. It was like when you're playing with like a big giant Mastiff or St. Bernard, like, oh my God, like your skull is just so massive. Veigar is one big goddamn dragon, but that whole sequence, it was just pure eye candy, and I just loved it to pieces. And we see that Damon and Elena now have 2 kids of their own. They've been offered some land in Pentos. Pentos is in a situation where they're going to be going to war soon with Lys and its allies. Basically, they're teaming up with Dorne and just The Stepstones continue to be a source of ongoing problems for anyone and everybody who likes to use those channels for sailing through. And Pentos would love nothing more than to have a couple dragon riders on their side, as well as whatever future dragons this marriage might yield, because as we see, Lena is preggers, but she wants to give birth back on Driftmark. She's tired of being basically kind of a wandering nomad. But from Damon's point of view, he basically says that with Valyria gone, none of them really belong anywhere. I mean, both the Velaryons as well as the Targaryens, they're just survivors of this dead kingdom that no one really misses. But perhaps my favorite scene this episode is one that takes place back in the training yard of King's Landing, where the children of Rhaenyra, Jacaerys and Lucerys, they're training alongside Aegon and Aemond. And the goal is to make them learn to like each other. They knock each other down and they pick each other up as Viserys is kind of lying to himself. So we've got Criston Cole supervising, you got Harwin Strong kind of watching and observing, and you've got Viserys and his hand watching as well. And of course, things start to escalate, things start to get tense. And eventually you got a situation where Jace and Aegon are throwing down. And once again, the colors are very specific. The princelings of Alicent are all dressed in green, and the princelings of Rhaenyra are all dressed in red and black, and that is always important to take note of. But the kids just go at it, and when Harwin sees that his son is basically on the receiving end of a beating of a kid who's roughly twice his size, he decides to step in, and then Cole goads him or provokes him into a response when he starts calling attention to the fact that Harwin's interest in these boys is more like the interest of a cousin or a father, etc. So Breakbones flips out, decks Cole, and Cole's on the ground laughing, knowing exactly what he did. He basically forced Harwin into exposing himself as the true father of these boys. And Lionel takes his son aside and basically says, "You've exposed us, and you've exposed us to possible exile, possible death." And Lionel eventually decides he needs to resign as Hand of the King, won't say why, and Viserys refuses the resignation. However, he does approve Lionel taking his son home back to Harrenhal. For people who remember, Harrenhal is where that Council of 101 took place. It's this giant castle that got melted and destroyed by Aegon the Conqueror many, many years ago. It's basically this giant cursed castle, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but obviously we see toward the end of the episode, it remains cursed because Lionel and his son Harwin get burned alive by these tongueless criminals that are sent after them by Harwin's own brother, Larys Clubfoot, who has decided that he wants to be on the side of Alicent. Clubfoot, he's as devious a plotter and schemer as you could ever hope to find in this wicked, wicked world, so much so that even Alicent is horrified by his actions, but he assures her, "Look, one day you will thank me and you will reward me, but for now, call your father Otto and tell him it's time to come back to King's Landing." And under normal circumstances, being a kinslayer is basically the worst thing you can do, whether you're killing a sibling or a parent or whatever the case might be. But Clubfoot gives zero shits, and the scene was so dark when we see him recruiting those guys, going down basically to death's row, recruiting these crooks, and then we see their tongues getting removed from their heads before that mission. Anyway, this show is gross in the best possible way. But let me wind things back a bit. We see that Laenor has got himself a new fella, Carl, and they're both hungry for battle. They're very eager to participate in this war in the Stepstones. But Rhaenyra is basically almost forced in a position where she has to order him to stay by her side. She knows a giant battle's coming one way or another, not necessarily one of the Stepstones, but one between her and Alicent. And she eventually decides that what she really needs to do is just round up all of her friends and allies and kids and go back to Dragonstone and just kind of hunker down. And she even at one point offers an olive branch to Alicent. During a meeting of the small council, you can see that Alicent and Rhaenyra are, in a not-so-veiled way, just kind of going after one another. And Rhaenyra does try to be the conciliator. She wants to seal the breach between the two families. She offers an egg from Syrax's next clutch, and she also proposes that Jacaerys, or Jace as he's nicknamed, that he marry Helaena and seal the breach between the two families. And her proposal is interrupted by the leaking of milk from her breasts, and she had the best response. She just covers up and says, "Seven hells." Seven hells is a swear, or I guess an expression that we all need to use much more often. And it was used beautifully in the previous show of Game of Thrones, but I'm glad that it's coming back. And poor Viserys is just doing everything he can to kind of keep a lid on all these tensions that are bubbling over. And due to his disease, he just looks 150,000 years old. I mean, he is weak. He constantly needs rest. Alicent's constantly having to look after him, but at the same time, she's starting to kind of step over him and speak perhaps in ways that he might not necessarily agree. Like at one point, Lionel comes by and wants to speak with him, and she says, no, the king is resting, and Viserys has to contradict her and allow Lionel in. But Alicent is now clearly reaching for and assuming much more control. But from her point of view, she feels like she's surrounded by alarmingly few allies, and she misses her father, and she misses his kind of partisan loyalty more than ever, which is how she finds herself with Larys Clubfoot as one of her chief allies. Even if he kind of scares her and he's not necessarily an ally she would want, she's got him nonetheless moving forward. But one of the last big remaining twists this episode is we see Laena having a really tough birth. Damon's faced with some really tough choices about whether or not they want to try and save the child, but Laena, who's always loved to fly, she goes out to her dragon, and in the book, she was trying to fly one final time because that was her greatest joy in life. But in this, she crawls out to her dragon, Veigar, and orders it to breathe fire on her. And it was amazing how that big, giant, fucking reptilian head almost seemed to be expressing sympathy or sadness, or maybe I was just projecting onto that beast what I wanted to see, but it initially refuses to comply, and she just keeps asking it again and again and again, and eventually, finally, it breathes fire on her. But I found that scene to be very moving. It just shows, in spite of how dangerous and terrible to behold and how just ferocious and powerful these beasts are, the bond they feel with their riders is for real, and I just thought that scene was handled beautifully, and all the more ominous, or all the more just chilling, bone-chilling the following day when you see the daughter examining the smoking skeleton of her mother. Being either a Targaryen or a Velaryon, it's a strange life these characters lead. And one last detail I want to shower some praise on, and we only saw it briefly this episode, but I mentioned it before during episode 2. The design and look of Dragonstone this season looks so fucking cool. I mean, they just pulled out all the stops, and it's just incredible to me how just a brief, fleeting shot of Rhaenyra and her kids and her husband all returning to Dragonstone, and nothing screams Targaryen more than the design and look of that volcanic island and it's an environment that's very conducive to raising dragons. And so as much as they made King's Landing their home after conquering Westeros, Dragonstone is really what the Targaryens are all about when it comes to just the flavor of the family. And the teaser for next week's episode looks pretty goddamn good. We see a funeral in Driftmark. We see a lot of daggers being drawn, in particular between Alicent and Rhaenyra. And we also see that Veigar is on the loose. I mean, a big fucking scary dragon without a rider is always a scary thing, especially one of the dragons that was part of the original conquest of Westeros, because Veigar was flown initially by Aegon's sister and wife. And so that dragon's got a lot of history. People are justifiably afraid of it. And obviously, with Balerion now dead and gone, Veigar remains the largest, most powerful dragon anywhere in this fictional setting. So lots of good stuff to come. But before I go, let me give a shout out to Manscape, the official sponsor of my podcast, Wrong Reel. Does your happy trail look more like a happy highway? Does your bush peek out over your fence? If you had to even think about the answer, you need the revolutionary products from Manscaped.com. Success is when preparation meets opportunity, and Manscaped's Platinum Package will make sure you're prepared when opportunity strikes. Join the 6 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped by going to Manscaped.com for 20% off plus free shipping with the code WRONGREEL. That is WRONGREEL in all caps. And just in case you remain unconvinced, the Manscaped Platinum Package 4.0 is the one-stop shop for the man who deserves it all. They designed this package to allow you to fully align your entire hygiene routine with elite products, which include the Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, Ultra Premium Body Wash, Ultra Premium 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner, Ultra Premium Deodorant, Crop Preserver Anti-Chafing Ball Deodorant, Crop Reviver Ball Spray Toner, Anti-Chafing Boxers, and the Shed Travel Bag to hold all your goods while traveling. So if you like this YouTube channel or you like my podcast Wrong Reel, consider supporting us with a purchase over at Manscaped with the discount code Wrong Reel. But that's all I've got for this week. Can't wait to see what comes next. Sadly, we only have 4 episodes left, but if you enjoyed this review, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell. Hope everyone has a great week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.